Maine Challenge goes up close with another U.S. Senate candidate next. Hello, and welcome to Maine Challenge. I'm Chuck Kruger, and today we have another candidate in the Democratic primary for the U.S. Senate who will hopefully face Susan Collins in November. Today we welcome Bre Kidman from Saco. Welcome, Bre.
Thanks for having me.
Glad to have you with us. Wanted to get right into it, get started with a question about your experience and your preparation for holding high office. And I wondered if you'd share some thoughts on what makes you qualified to take a seat in the United States Senate.
Yeah, so I've heard the question like, what makes this an entry-level position? And my response is that I'm not an entry-level candidate, right? Like, a lot of people want to talk about, elected office experience or experience getting elected. And I think overall, American government at this point in time has put too much emphasis on the process of getting elected and on the process of being a candidate, and not enough emphasis on what you'll actually do while you're serving. To serve in the United States Senate. Magna cum laude. I've been practicing for a few years. While I was in law school, I did a policy fellowship at the National Center for Transgender Equality, where I worked in federal policy. I also worked on state policy at Maine's Permanent Commission on the Status of Women. And so, I don't have any elected office experience, which is something that I should have led with, right? So I don't have any experience getting elected. And I also don't see that as a drawback because I haven't participated in this process in a way that compromises my values. I think, we'll get into more of this later, but one of the central tenets of why I'm running is that I think the process that we're using is not effective to select people who will serve well. And so I've had an opportunity with this campaign to run a campaign the way that I think a campaign should be run, and that centers my values, and to focus on what I would do if I would serve, to focus on kind of brushing up on policy areas where I've been weak, and to spend time kind of focusing on the service aspects of public service, as opposed to, fundraising, advertising, all of those things that don't really have anything to do with being a senator.
Good point. Where did you go to law school, and where was your policy experience?
So I went to the University of Maine School of Law. Had a great time there. It was a really, really good experience for me. And my policy experience was at the National Center for Transgender Equality in Washington, D.C. in 2015. I worked there as a law fellow. And then in 2014, I was at Maine's Permanent Commission on the Status of Women.
Very interesting. And how do you feel about the upcoming election? I think some people have gotten the word now that the primary has been rescheduled from June to July 14th, Tuesday, July 14th. I'll repeat that about 200 times. But July 14th, we are having a primary in which you will be participating with two other candidates, Sarah Gideon and Betsy Sweet, in the Democratic primary. And the winner of that will face Susan Collins. How do you feel about the rescheduling of the election? And also, how do you feel about election or voting by mail?
So, to be completely honest, I'm a little nervous. I'm a little nervous that July 14th is too soon. As much as I would love to be ready to be done in June and to get on to November and start really like hammering away at the next phase of this process, I think COVID-19 has complicated everything. That's a truism, right? And I don't it's safe to gather in the numbers necessary to do poll work. I also have concerns about The people who wind up volunteering to do polls are often people who are especially vulnerable to this virus. And so I'm concerned about our ability to have staffed and operational polling places. I would love to see, most of this election happen by mail, but that has its own concerns, especially where the postal service is in such jeopardy right now. Like, I'm worried that we're not going to be able to get ballots out to people in time. I'm worried that we're not going to get ballots back in time. I think this election presents a lot of challenges, and I'm hopeful that those challenges will become opportunities to kind of sort this out before November, because awful as it is to say this, I don't necessarily believe we're going to be free and clear of this virus by then.
Yeah. Well, I served as I think I told you, I served 4 terms in the Maine legislature. And as such, I got to know and work with Matt Dunlap, our Secretary of State, and that office. And I would tell you and tell our viewers that I have great confidence in that office to do a very good job. That said, I would be crazy not to have some concerns about how it's all going to work too. But I'm interested to know how our candidates feel about the upcoming election, because it's so different. How do you see yourself campaigning in this primary season?
So my campaign has been different from the beginning, right? Like, even before COVID, we were doing something completely different than other campaigns in this primary. I got into this race. Part of why I got into this race was a concern that raising money for election and for re-election was driving our policy in a way that just wasn't responsive to the needs of everyday people. So rather than try and participate in that system where I'm scrambling to raise as much money as possible and spend as much money as possible on advertising and on donor lists and on things that don't really do any good for anyone, I said, what would it look like if we tried to do something different? So, I didn't realize that until I was a few weeks into it, because I started trying to fundraise, and it was complicated, but the short version is that I'd heard that this election was already decided. What I got from local organizations was, what are you doing? This is Sarah's race. And I was frustrated, and I was kind of downtrodden about it. And I thought, like, why would I try and do this race in the exact way that is so frustrating to me? So what I decided to do, and this is back in July of last year, I decided that I was going to use the seed money that I accumulated to have, and the idea behind that was, if you can, use your campaign to do a tangible good thing for your community, for the communities you'd be serving, that the word of mouth advertising that would come from something like that would be more valuable than anything that you put on TV that people just want to fast forward through, or any mailers that people just kind of glance at and throw away and add to a landfill. So the idea was to kind of use what resources we had to do as much good as possible in Maine, and see what that does for the process, because everybody wants to get money out of politics, but you don't really see anyone doing anything about it. Obviously that shifted with COVID. And so we were faced with a situation where it was just the point where we were about to start having these fundraising events, and all of a sudden everyone was on lockdown. So that first week, I started getting a lot of emails from organizations that I've been involved with from my advocacy and activism over the last few years. And these organizations were putting together mutual aid projects where they were, getting out into the communities and helping people who had an immediate need. And so I said, okay, that's what the campaign's going to do. I called the FEC. I made sure that everything that I was doing was above board. And they said, yeah, spend your campaign money however you want, as long as it's not, a specifically listed illegal way. I said, okay. So I started buying groceries for people, going out into the community and buying groceries for people who either couldn't afford groceries or couldn't leave the house because they're immunocompromised. That's kind of expanded into sending grocery cards to people who are in need. And just supporting those projects that are already existing with needs that need to be met. I think it's hard because we've spent over half of our campaign funds on mutual aid projects, but that's a drop in the bucket. It's barely a drop in the bucket. It's a microscopic spot in the bucket compared to what these other candidates could do if they put the same or even a fraction of those resources towards this effort. You look at Susan Collins was talking about how she, brought $5 million in expanded testing. Well, that's less than half of what was spent on advertising alone in the last quarter. This money is being spent, and these huge astronomical figures of money are being spent, and they're not doing anything for the people of Maine. They're not doing anything to make our lives measurably better. So they're spending all this money to tell us that they will do all these good things if they get elected. Well, you have the money to do some of those things right now. Why aren't you doing them?
That's a fair question. I'll try to ask the others that same question. You already mentioned the COVID-19 coronavirus. In your opinion, how is the state meeting this challenge that nobody's ever seen before?
This is an unprecedented situation in modern times. There are very few right answers. However, I have been consistently dismayed by the failure to really adequately address the concerns about housing throughout this crisis. One of the first things I would have done, and one of the first things that I started discussing with other people who are concerned about how we're going to handle this, is freezing rents, and not just freezing rents and making them all come due 30 days after the end of the crisis, but freezing rents, because even after the end of this crisis, I mean, we have to recognize that a lot of the people who are impacted by this are people who are already living paycheck to paycheck, even if they get back to work. And that's a big if, based on the state of the economy. But even if we get back to work, the idea that we're going to somehow have saved up 3 months worth of rent at the end of this is ludicrous. We are all, most of us, I should say, most people are in a pretty rough economic spot right now. And I think, I remember a press conference where Governor Mills talked about having talked to a few landlords and being sure that they'll be understanding. And the next day seeing that, despite the courts being closed, one of my friends was, facing eviction. And it was, it's kind of stark to see the disconnect between our elected officials and what people are actually living. So I think that's a long-winded way. I'm sorry, I talked in a big circle, but that's a long-winded way of saying that I would pay a little more attention to people who got left behind. Like, I'm an independent contractor with the state of Maine. I've actually still worked throughout this entire campaign. I'm a medium income Mainer. I live pretty much paycheck to paycheck. So this is also my lived experience. And I'm still waiting for an unemployment application to go through. Like, I have no idea when I'm going to get any updates on it. And I think, if we had thought about gig workers a little bit earlier in the process and thought about people who traditionally don't get access to resources or support, and just kind of bumped that up on the timeline, we might be in a different position now. But again, it's easy to say that, and I recognize that there were a lot of variables at play.
Do you support a radically changing our healthcare system to a Medicare for all or a universal healthcare or single payer system? And I see you nodding your head yes. What do you see as the major obstacles to achieving that, and how would you face and overcome those obstacles?
So one, before I forget, let me thank you for asking that question there, because that's one that I forgot in the last question. I wouldn't have just expanded testing and treatment to people who have insurance coverage in a pandemic. We are only as healthy as the people with the least access to care. But also not in a pandemic, our country is only as healthy as the people with the least access to care. So I do support Medicare for all, and I do support single payer without reservation or without qualification. And I think the answer to why we don't have it is money and politics. Health insurance companies and pharmaceutical companies contribute huge amounts of money to the political system, and they do that directly in the form of their corporate PACs. And they also do it indirectly in the form of like leadership PACs and ideological PACs, where they'll give money to these, like such and such senator's leadership PAC, or, Citizens for Choice, like they'll give all this money to these PACs. And so it gets kind of woven into the fabric of the political machine. Everybody wants to talk about how they're against it and how they want to fight this money, but it gets in from all these sideways things, and you see it reflected in the policy. You see it reflected in who's willing to advocate strenuously for this, knowing that it will ultimately limit the profit margins of people who are giving them money. Like it's against the interest of the people who are supposed to be on our side.
Very true. I keep wanting to hear an answer to the question of how do you face down these extremely wealthy, extremely profit-oriented executives and company leaders and say, okay, you had a good run. You're not going to make big money anymore. You're going to turn the whole system around and like it. And that's my big problem with it. I want to see it, but I don't know how anybody's going to do that. And I keep waiting for the answer to that.
I got it.
Go ahead.
They don't owe me. I don't owe them anything. I don't owe them literally anything. I owe them nothing. The Affordable Care Act wasn't affordable for me. Like I still am struggling to pay my healthcare premiums. And I know that that's the story of a lot of people, in this state, certainly, and all over the country. These health insurance companies haven't done anything for me. They're not contributing to my campaign directly or indirectly. I've taken no PAC money, not even from ideological or leadership PACs. They have no stake in me, and I won't let them have a stake in me because I think that their existence is wrong. I think that any company that derives their profit from making sure you get as little healthcare for your dollar as possible has no right to exist in this country. And so I have no problem staring down the barrel of these big executives and saying your power is meaningless here. If I get elected, it will be because I turned away all of this money. It will be because this money was irrelevant to what I was trying to do. It will be because I valued, these values that we all espouse enough to live them. And I think, if we can get candidates who are willing to do that, who are willing to say, okay, yeah, it's going to be harder if I can't hire staff. It's going to be harder if I can't pay myself from the campaign. It's going to be harder if I can't buy TV ads, but it's the right thing to do. If we get more people who are willing to do that, these companies don't stand a chance.
Okay, big, tall order there. And another tall order, of course, is the climate crisis. And I'm wondering what Senator Kidman would do once elected and sworn in on the floor of the United States Senate. How are you going to create a coalition big enough in terms of saving the climate and saving the planet for the next generations to follow?
So in terms of creating coalition and sort of like reaching across the aisle, because I can appreciate that a lot of what I say sounds really far left, which it's not, but okay. If we say that I'm really far left, I think, the reach across the aisle is, hey guys, the overall cost is less if we do it this way. If we look at what's going to happen to the FEMA budget, if we look at how much it's going to cost to rebuild all these seawalls, if we look at how much it's going to cost to mitigate all the damage that's going to come as these storms get worse and as we get more flooding, like it's going to cost less to do the right thing about climate. And it's going to cost less to cut off subsidies to fossil fuel companies. It's going to cost less to invest in new green technologies. I look at the Green New Deal as a roadmap to using a crisis and turning it into an opportunity for economic justice. And, the United States is in a position where we haven't really been a pioneer of innovation or manufacturing for a while. We've kind of fallen off from that. And I think we have a chance now to get back on the cutting edge of making things here in the US. And so if we invest in making those things here, if we invest in public owned and operated utilities, if we invest in public owned and operated solar, wind, emerging technologies, we have an opportunity to rectify some disparities in economic justice in this country, and an opportunity to meet the climate crisis and what it asks of us in a way that that leaves everybody better off and creates kind of fewer of those hidden costs that we wind up paying anyway.
Very good. Okay, enough of this light stuff. I want to get serious here. I've seen in looking at some of your material, I see this recurring theme of that B that's over your left shoulder. And I want to know, what's the deal with the B?
So B has always been or it hasn't always been. It's been my nickname for about 16 years. I have a baby sister who is 16, and she's the light of my life. My sister's the light of my life, and she nicknamed me B when she was a baby, and it stuck. And you know how everybody, I don't know if you have an internal monologue. I recently learned that not everybody does. But in my internal monologue, I call myself BK. I've always called myself BK. And that was my performance art name, you know, as a performance artist in Portland. I always called myself BK. When I graduated law school, it became BK Esquire. So, you know, the people closest to me have always called me B, and I have like all these little kind of B motif things around and about my life.
And when your sister has children, they can call you Aunt B.
Yeah, I'm actually, so my other sister has a small baby, and we're trying to get her to say auntie. It's, yeah.
I want to talk a little bit to lighten up again. I wanted to talk a little bit about Social Security. And I never gave much thought to it. I was self-employed almost my entire career, and I never gave a whole lot of thought to it. I definitely give a lot of thought to it now, and I'm wondering if you have some ideas or some solutions as to how we're going to make Social Security vibrant and safe and have a healthy future for when you're ready to retire and for the rest of the next following generations. If you have any solutions for the challenges that are facing Social Security.
Yeah, I think the biggest one is getting rid of the cap. I mean, I don't know why I'm blanking right now on what the cap is. I want to say it's 150,000 a year, or maybe it's 300,000 a year.
No, I think it's 137.7.
137.70. Thank you. There's a lot of numbers swirling around up here. But so the cap is, you know, slightly above middle class incomes. And we have people who are making, you know, millions and tens of millions and hundreds of millions and billions of dollars who aren't paying in any more than, you know, people who are making just above middle class income. And that's wrong. I mean, you know, at the end of the day, government's fine because we share resources.
Is there a legislative solution? And how would you get there as a senator?
So I listened to Jared Golden talk about this a few months ago, and I'm trying to recall, because he said a lot of things that I really liked, and they had been working in the House about what they were going to do about the cap. You know, whether they were going to move it up or how they would adjust it. And so, I mean, I think, you know, the legislative solution is fighting for an elimination of the cap. I support a complete elimination of the cap. You know, just keep it proportional all the way up. And that's what I think the best solution is. You know, I think also, you know, you have to look at it holistically, right? All of these things kind of interact with each other. So if we have Medicare for all and healthcare costs because we're taxing corporations appropriately, and we have the tax revenues because we're taxing billionaires appropriately, you know, I think a lot of these kind of far left solutions bring more revenue into the system and make us better able to address the needs of our people. And Social Security is certainly something that I count among those. But I think, you know, as far as things that directly relate to Social Security and directly correlate with kind of its liquidity and its ability to pay out, I think the cap is the biggest one.
Very good. We're sort of wrapping up here, but briefly, how would you delineate the key differences between you and the other candidates in the primary, but also in the general election in November?
Yeah, the biggest one is I'm doing the thing that everybody is talking about. Like, everybody in this race has talked about how there's too much money in politics. I'm the only one who's not doing it. I haven't bought ads, save one-page ad in the Maine People's Alliance booklet. I haven't bought any digital ads. I haven't bought any print ads. I haven't bought any TV ads. I haven't spent any money on fundraising consulting. I haven't, no, you know what I did early on? I spent $1,000 or less on fundraising compared to millions of dollars for other candidates in this race. I bought no donor lists, again, compared to millions of dollars spent on names of people to call for more money.
Final question, wrapping up in just a few now. What's your most important promise to Maine voters?
My most important promise to Maine voters is that I won't be bought or sold. I'm doing this campaign the way that I have always wanted a campaign done. I've always wanted to see someone run like this. I've always wanted to see someone with a backbone enough to stand up for their values, even when it's inconvenient. And I promise to continue to stand up for my values, even when it's inconvenient.
Thank you very much. Bre Kidman, candidate for the Democratic nomination for the United States Senate. We appreciate you've been with us on Maine Challenge this week. And we welcome you viewers back to come back next week again to meet Sarah Gideon, also a candidate for the U.S. Senate Democratic nomination. And we thank you again, Bre Kidman, for being on our show.
Thanks for having me. Great to talk with you.
And we'll see you all next week.
Show your support for Maine Challenge and LCTV's programming. We're all about community. Please go to lctv.org to make a contribution. Your support makes us stronger together.